welcome to another edition of the Money Control Show. I'm Sakshi Batra and this is where we focus on macros, markets and money. On the show today, we'll talk about the various tax proofs you can give to your employers to save taxes. We'll also talk about the IMD's forecast of the southwest monsoons, and we'll get you insights into the stock markets and the cues you need to watch out for in the coming week. In our personal finance segment, we'll continue with our series on tax planning. While last week we talked about the various tax deductions you can get on expenses, today we'll be focusing on various tax proofs that you can collect through the year to give to your employers. Mr. Gautam Nayak, prominent chartered accountant, is back with us to share an insight. Thanks a lot, Mr. Nayak. It's great to have you back with us. Now, let me begin by asking you the most basic tax proof that most of us require. That is the proof of house rent paid. But before we talk about the documents required, let me also ask you to elaborate what sort of income tax deductions we can get for paying house rent and what is house rent allowance or HRA all about?
See, under the Income Tax Act, Sakshi, there are two types of allowances for which you can claim exemption. One is allowances in respect of carrying out duties of your employment. The second is personal allowances. And house rent allowance is one category of personal allowance for which you get the exemption. Now, there are two conditions to be able to claim that exemption. One is that you should have actually got a house rent allowance, and secondly, that you should have paid rent in excess of 10% of your salary. Then what happens is that you get an exemption which is 50% of your salary, that is between 10 to 60%. If you pay rent from 10 to 60% of your salary as rent, then you get that exemption of 50% if you're living in one of the four metros, that is Mumbai, Delhi, Calcutta or Chennai. And if it's in any other city, then you get 40% of your salary, that is from 10 to 50% of your salary, whatever rent you pay, to that extent you get. But obviously you should have paid rent in excess of that, and it's limited to the amount of actual HRA. So whichever is the lowest of that is what you get as an exemption.
So that means we have to collect the rent receipts throughout this year. And do we need to submit original rent receipts? And can we also claim HRA as a business expenditure?
See, so far as HRA is concerned, the proof of rent which is required is, one is, I think, in a situation where in some states you require a leave license agreement to be registered, it's advisable that you should have a registered leave license agreement besides the rent receipts. Now, those rent receipts, you don't have to submit the originals to your employer. You can submit copies of that. Similarly, of your leave license agreement, you can submit a copy of that to your employer. Of course, in places where you don't need to register the leave license agreement, it's still advisable to have a leave license agreement in place, and that's what you should submit to your employer along with the rent receipt. That proves the genuineness of the expenditure. So far as business is concerned, I think business stands on a totally different footing from employees. Now, in a business, you have to show that you have incurred that expenditure wholly and exclusively for the purpose of business. So therefore, you don't get exemption for any rent that you pay, but there is a deduction which is available under Chapter 6A, under Section 80GG, where you can get an exemption for the rent paid, but that is limited only up to 5,000 rupees a month.
Right, and what about those taxpayers who live with their parents? Can they submit rent to their parents and claim a deduction on that? And in that case, what is the sort of rent receipt we are looking at?
See, I think this is a slightly grey area and where people sometimes go overboard and it creates problems. See, the agreement with the parents should not be sham. There is very clearly a Delhi High Court decision which says that the children do not have an automatic right to stay with their parents. It depends upon the parents' indulgence. If the parents permit them, so long as they permit them, they can stay with their parents. So obviously one can justify a payment of rent to the parents, but the problem really is, for instance, we've seen cases where people have, there's been a reported tribunal decision in fact on this, where the employee has claimed an exemption of house rent allowance and showed receipts of payments to the parents, but there is no proof from the bank statements, etc., of the payments to the parents. The parents have not paid taxes on it. So all that shows that this was not a genuine transaction. Now, in order to be a genuine transaction, therefore, you need to ensure that you've entered into a leave license agreement. Your parents don't continue to live there actually, because if you're living in the same house, then maybe you could say that you're a paying guest, but you can't say that the house has been let to you and your parents continue to stay there. So I think it's something where you have to be a little careful to see that yes, it does sound genuine. It's not something which is concocted. That's, I think, the key to it.
Now, the other thing, Mr. Nayak, that most of us are interested to know is how our holidays can help us get tax deduction. I'm talking about LTA or the leave travel allowance. How frequently we can use it, and is that different from transport allowance, which was replaced by standard deduction 2 years ago?
That's right. See, transport allowance was a conveyance for your conveyance from your residence to your home and back, and that is eligible up to 1600 rupees per month. That's eligible and continues to be exempt. Leave travel concession or leave travel allowance, as they say, is something which the employer can reimburse you your actual airfare for you and your family, that is the dependents, to any place in India. That's something which qualifies for the benefit of the exemption. But there is a block of 4 years, and that current block is from calendar year 2018 to calendar year 2021. Within this block of 4 years, you can claim this leave travel allowance exemption only twice in this block of 4 years. And for that, obviously, you will have to submit proofs of tickets, boarding passes, etc. So each employer has their own mechanisms to ensure that this is not a fraudulent claim, but it's a genuine claim.
Now, some companies also offer reimbursements to mobile bills as reimbursement. So how best to make use of them? And I assume here that one needs to preserve their mobile bills through the year.
Yes, what is exempt is actual reimbursement of mobile bills, where the bills are borne by the employer. So therefore, if the employer is reimbursing your actual mobile bills and you submit copies of the mobile bills, that would be completely exempt from tax. And typically, I think today, costs of mobile phones is down. Your data also doesn't cost so much. So if an employer is, say, offering you 100 rupees per month, and your bills exceed that amount, and he gives you 500 rupees a month or the actual amount of the bills, then I think you can claim the entire thing as an exemption. But if you're getting something over and above the actual bills that you submit, then that will obviously be taxable.
Right, and if I'm not mistaken, some companies do ask for an estimate of all of the above expenses at the start of the year. So how should we get ourselves an estimate then? And what if our final bills are different from the estimate?
See, what you have to remember is that under the income tax rules, there is a Form 12BB which you have to submit to the employer, so far as house rent allowance is concerned, so far as the interest on housing loan is concerned, and so far as the deductions that you're claiming under Chapter 6A, which is your ATC for the life insurance premium, etc. And so that is something which you have to submit. So far as the other purposes are concerned, I think it ultimately depends on what the actuals are. And typically what employers do is at the beginning of the year, they will take from you a declaration and an estimate. And towards the end of the year, say in the month of January, what they will do is they will take it at actuals and accordingly adjust the final taxes that they would deduct from your salary. That's how it works in practice.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thanks a lot, Mr. Nayak, for sharing with us all that very important information. Hope all the viewers have also taken a note of all of that as well. Moving on, India's Met Department this week has given its forecast for the southwest monsoon rains. Watch this insight to find out the importance of monsoons and the details of the forecast. The southwest monsoon serves as the lifeblood for the critical summer-sown kharif crops such as rice, sugar, cotton, coarse cereals. It is also critical to replenish 81 reservoirs necessary for power generation, irrigation and drinking. It arrives in Kerala by the first week of June. It hits Maharashtra around June 15 and Delhi around June 29. Nearly 60% of the country's farms are dependent on the rains. The Indian Meteorological Department has said that it expects the southwest monsoon to be near normal and at 96% of its long period average. IMD has also said that El Nino conditions are currently prevailing over the equator but could weaken between June and September, the main monsoon months. It triggers bigger rains in the Indian subcontinent. This year, the monsoon is critical because many states including Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh are in the middle of a drought-like situation. There are reports that parts of Kerala that was hit by a devastating flood last year are now facing a water crisis with rivers and streams running dry. Abundant rains can push up rural spending on several items such as televisions, cars and gold. Conversely, below normal monsoon can negatively impact the broader economy besides pushing up food inflation. In its first long-range forecast for the season, the Indian Met Department has said that the June to September monsoon is likely to be 96% of the long period average with a model error of plus minus 5%. Let's welcome Gaurav Choudhury to give us a sense of what will this translate to in terms of agriculture, growth and economy. Thanks a lot, Gaurav. Appreciate you joining in. Now, first up, for the benefit of all our viewers, help them understand that what does this 96% of long-term average really mean in terms of rainfall, and why is this monsoon forecast so crucial?
So monsoon forecast is always crucial every year because as we know that about 70% of our agricultural output actually comes from the summer sown kharif crop, and 60% of this is rain dependent. But so far as the first forecast is concerned, monsoon is said to be normal if it is in the range of 94 to 104%.
Okay.
Of a 50-year long period average. So this time in the first forecast, that's why the Met Office says it's going to be near normal, because it has a plus minus 5% error margin.
Right.
So it could be 91% or it could be 101%. If it is say below 94%, it will be below normal, and if it is below 90%, it's going to be considered to be deficient. During the month of May, the Met Department is again going to come out with a new forecast.
Okay.
Which is going to have more granular details, also about the kind of the special distribution of the rain in India, and to what extent in the rain will take, there'll be rains in the various meteorological subdivisions of the country. Those details will also be given, because as we know, the first landfall of monsoon rain in mainland India takes place in the first week of June in Kerala. So in the last week of May, when the second forecast comes, it'll have more details about it, because by that time the monsoon, as we know, monsoon are drafts of breeze that traverses from the Pacific area. So if by that time you would know how it has traversed and what is the kind of moisture that this breeze is carrying. So more details will come out in the last week of May. But as of now, it seems it's going to be probably near normal, and that is what is going to bring a cheer at least for farmers, and if more also to various stocks that are dependent on agricultural demand.
Absolutely. So definitely good news for all the farmers, and definitely last time around we saw poor rainfall and drought in some parts of India as well. But last time around we also saw that IMD and SkyMed both actually got it wrong in their forecast. Yes. IMD forecast about 97% of long period average. However, we got around 91% of long period average. So what are the chances of these predictions actually going right?
So it's a very complex, weather science is a very complex science, especially predicting monsoon has never been easy, regardless of the fact that we have made great advances, advancements in trying to predict which way monsoon are going to behave, because it's not just about the Indian Met Department, it's also, say for instance, the Australian Weather Bureau and various weather bureaus across the world that is tracking the monsoon winds and the moisture that it carries, etc., etc. It's not just that we are only getting data from our own satellites. We are also sharing data across from various Met departments across the world.
Right.
And very rarely you will see 100% accuracy. It's a very difficult science to predict. But having said that, we have more or less got large parts of the large number of metrics or parameters of the weather forecasting correct over the years. So if the long period average is 96%, for instance, and if it sticks to 96%, what will be more important to notice here is to what extent monsoon actually distributes across the country.
Even distribution is important.
So even distribution and normal even distribution across the country is important. Say for instance, if it rains less in the northeast and if it rains more in south, then it will have impact on the crops that are cultivated in these areas. But if it rains in abundance in eastern India and southern India, but it doesn't rain in North India, which is the grain bowl of the country, nationally we might still have a 96% average. But if the grain bowl of country is actually parched and there's scanty rainfall in this part of the area, it could affect agricultural output.
Absolutely. And then what is El Nino, and what has the Met Department really said about the threat of El Nino, say in the months of June and July, the crucial months for agriculture as well? So, and will that also impact the early onset of monsoons?
Yeah, so that is critical, because El Nino, which essentially is a weather phenomenon which is characterized by unusual high temperatures in the Pacific, and this triggers drought or scanty rainfall in the Indian subcontinent. As of now, there are chances of an El Nino. But the Met Department has said that as we progress between June and September, which are the main monsoon months, the probability of an El Nino will actually come down. On the onset of monsoon, it is absolutely important that the monsoon arrives on time, because it is June and early part of July are the main sowing weeks. And it is a rice sapling, so they have to follow a particular pattern of sowing and cropping. And if say for instance rice saplings have to be first tended for 21 days in the nursery and then moved on to the larger fields. So, and that is why rain during these 21 days is important. So if the rain is not it doesn't rain in abundance, in plentiful in June and early part of July, it could cause some degree of distress among rice cultivators.
All right. Then I also wanted to ask you about the agricultural output as well as the impact on food prices. Now, in the couple of months, we've seen that both indications by the CPI and WPI inflation that food prices are inching up. Now, with this prediction of a near normal rainfall and El Nino impact as well, what kind of impact do you expect on the food prices?
If the monsoon arrives late and if it remains scanty and the distribution of monsoon is not even, then it can cause problems. It can cause problems because one, it's going to bring down farmers' income, and two, because of low supply, it will cause. I mean, there'll be fewer stocks that will be moving on to markets. That will cause a supply shock, and that supply shock is going to push up prices. That is not something that the new government, whichever party comes to power, would like to encounter immediately after taking office.
Absolutely. But what about the rural demand? Do you see a revival then?
If the monsoon is fine and is normal, and the kharif crop actually is quite abundant and it's a bumper harvest, rural demand will pick up, and rural demand has a direct impact or direct bearing on the broader economy. Say for instance, demand for goods such as motorcycles, tractors, etc., and cement, because there'll be more rural houses being built if the farm income goes up. That has a direct bearing on the way these industries behave. So monsoon and the summer sown kharif crop is critical for rural demand, which in turn will boost the broader economy.
Right. Thanks a lot, Gaurav, for sharing all that insight with us. Well, near normal monsoon prediction is definitely good news after poor rains seen last year, giving hopes to increased agricultural output and therefore aiding growth. Moving on to markets now, Santosh Nair, editor of Moneycontrol, joins in with all the action in the stock markets and cues for the week ahead. Thanks a lot, Santosh, for joining in. Now, it was a truncated week this time around, but bulls resumed their rally with benchmark indices clocking in record highs. What's pushing the indices higher?
Well, thanks, Sakshi. In one word, the answer to your question would be brute money power. Foreign funds continue to be heavy buyers, and that's what's driving benchmark indices higher. It was generally felt that activity would be a bit subdued this week as it was a truncated one, but you saw pretty much good activity with both Sensex, Nifty touching record highs. But the rally is also quite narrow. If you really look at the number of stocks which are participating in the rally, those are very few. So the market is lacking breadth at this point in time. The good part is that the first set of earnings that have been released so far, mainly in the case of the tech sector, the management commentary has been fairly positive. At least they are not talking about any demand problems. So that's also helping sentiment a little bit. Of course, it's very early days, but on the whole, expectations are that the earnings numbers for this quarter should be decent, continuing on the similar lines as what we saw for the December quarter as well. The overall sentiment is positive. However, the point to be noted is that participation is not very high.
Right now, focus was also on big earnings and the second phase of polling as well. What indications did markets get from here?
Well, the initial set of numbers so far have been decent. Usually in the first phase it is tech and private sector banks which come out with the numbers, and usually they are pretty positive. So market doesn't look at those numbers very closely, but what the market would be closely watching out for is how the mid and small cap companies perform during the March quarter. So most of these stocks took a beating during the sell-off in the market in January and early February, and many of the stocks have not really recovered from that hammering. So the earnings would be key for these companies. Already the prices, the depressed prices seem to indicate that these companies are unlikely to report a big surprise as far as earnings are concerned. Well, the voter turnout in the second phase has been pretty decent, although that's unlikely to have any immediate impact on market sentiment. Right now, what you're seeing is mostly a very strong inflow of foreign money that is pushing stock prices higher.
All right, Santosh, then what are the big cues to watch out for in the coming week?
Well, the focus will continue to be on corporate earnings for at least the next couple of weeks, after which again you'll probably see the exit poll numbers coming in and market reacting to that. But next week, among the key companies that will be reporting their numbers, you have Hero MotoCorp, you have Axis, you have ACC, and you also have Maruti Suzuki, ICICI Pru. So these are some of the companies that will be reporting their quarterly numbers next week. You could see a lot of stock specific action. Overall market, as far as the indices are concerned, the movement could be a bit range bound there, as there will continue to be profit taking at higher levels.
Thanks, Santosh, for sharing with us all those details. And with that, it's also a wrap here on the Money Control Show. But you can catch up on all the news from the world of business and finance on our digital platform, moneycontrol.com. Many thanks for tuning in.